Hey guys, tonight we slip into sandals, weathered, sea-worn, and shuffle along the crumbling shoreline where a strange, briny stink rides the wind. It's not rotting fish. It's something worse. A smell so sour it made even hardened sailors retch. Yet this foul perfume launched fortunes, seduced kings, and dyed the very robes of emperors. You're standing at the edge of Tyre, 3,000 years ago, where snails were sacrificed for status, and where the sea shimmered purple not for magic, but for mucus. You probably won't survive this stench if you're a modern nose. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And feel free to drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love knowing where in the world you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You squelch across slick stone paths behind the dye workshops of ancient Phoenicia. There's a reason they're far from homes. The air is thick with the sour, putrid tang of decaying mollusk flesh. Massive heaps of murex snail shells, split and emptied, tower like sickly pyramids. You gag a little. This is where purple was born, not the dainty lavender of springtime, but the deep, almost black, thundercloud hue that whispered power across continents. Historians still argue whether it was divine inspiration or stubborn experimentation that led Phoenician traders to crack open a sea snail, let it rot, and then somehow think, let's dye cloth with this. One account says it was Hercules' dog who first bit into a murex, came away with a purple-stained muzzle, and gave his mythological owner the idea. Cute, right? Except there's also the version where a curious fisherman tried to clean squid ink from his net with a bit of cloth, and it wouldn't come off. Neither tale is confirmed, but they linger in scrolls and campfire gossip, half-truths clinging to history like barnacles on a hole. What is certain is this: the Phoenicians, that loose federation of sea-loving cities like Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos, got very good at snail farming. Well, farming might be generous. They essentially overhunted the murex into regional extinction. You watch workers, thin, tanned, and grimacing, crack snails open with stone mallets, extract a teensy white gland, and let it sunbake until it ferments into a deep red-black glop. Lovely. They needed thousands of snails to dye a single robe. Not shirts. Not socks. One robe. That's why Tyrian purple became a symbol of terrifying exclusivity. Wearing it told the world you had money to burn, servants to scrub you clean of snail stink, and a complete disregard for olfactory comfort. You wander past racks of drying cloth, glinting like bruised velvet in the sun. No two purples are quite the same. Some shimmer almost crimson. Others veer toward midnight. Historians still debate whether this variance came from snail species, dye technique, or just the unpredictable alchemy of rot. The truth is probably all three. A bored merchant glares at you for breathing too close to his wares. You move on. Further down the lane, past dye pits and buckets full of mystery liquids you really don't want to investigate, you find the real traders, the ones who'll ship this cloth across the Mediterranean. These men, and they're usually men, don't reek of snails. They smell of salt, cedar resin, and coin. Gold rings gleam on fingers that never touched a mollusk. They don't care how the purple gets made, only that it sells. And oh, how it sells. Purple threads are bartered for spices, tin, papyrus, even lapis lazuli. Kings in Anatolia send messengers demanding samples. Priests in Egypt beg for scraps. Even the Greeks, who aren't exactly Phoenician fans, hoard it. If the gods themselves were clothes, they're probably Phoenician imports. You shuffle toward the shore again, where the snails were first plucked. Murex traps bob gently in the tide, wooden and crude but effective. Some still twitch with shellfish doomed to become fashion. There's something darkly poetic in it all. The color of royalty, made from death. The pride of nations, soaked in slime. And still, even now, a breeze lifts the drying cloth, and the purple dances like firelight. It's beautiful. Stinks to high heaven, sure. But beautiful. You trudge inland just as the sun begins its lazy climb over the tiled rooftops of Tyre. The city wakes like a ship caught in slow waves, uneven, groaning, but with purpose. You pass sleepy-eyed porters untying bundles of cinnamon and cedar, barefoot children herding goats far too confidently, and merchants adjusting their robes as they mutter about interest rates and rat infestations. And always that faint tang of salt and old snails lurking somewhere in the breeze. Tyre doesn't look like much from the hills, but up close, it's a humming, clanging wonder. This is a town built by hands that understood waves better than walls. Most of the city seems constructed to lean toward the sea, like it's trying to eavesdrop on far-off ships. Phoenicians, as you're learning, were ocean people first, city folk second. At the dockside, the mood sharpens. Workers swarm like ants, loading amphorae of olive oil, bolts of purple-drenched linen, and even a suspiciously large crate labeled tools that clinks like it's full of swords. Phoenicians were traders, sure, but no one said they were squeaky clean. One young trader, barely older than a teenager, gives you a sleepy grin as he counts ropes. His tunic is dyed the faintest shade of violet, not the royal deep purple, but close enough to flex a little. Export grade, he winks. Real stuff goes to queens and corpses. It's a strange thought that the best dyed cloth might end up buried, never seen again. But for the Phoenicians, a dead noble was still a paying customer. Historians still argue whether these cities were truly unified or just competitive siblings squabbling over snail supplies. Tyre and Sidon, especially, had a rivalry that makes modern corporate sabotage look polite. Some scrolls whisper of shipments accidentally set on fire, or trusted messengers who switched allegiance mid-voyage. But when a foreign warlord knocked, Phoenicians locked shields, briefly. You watch as cargo scribes, hunched over oily tablets, record every single item bound for sea. Nothing leaves without a mark. The purple dye exports are tagged with an extra seal, an eye-shaped symbol that warns of theft but also glints with quiet smugness. Everyone wants what the Phoenicians have. Not everyone is invited to have it. A line of camels shuffles by, their eyes heavy-lidded with boredom. They've come from inland, perhaps Damascus or beyond, bringing silver and ivory to trade. Their drivers speak a dozen dialects, none quite the same, yet somehow business gets done. A flick of the wrist. A sharp nod. A purse exchanged under a cloak. You can practically hear the value of Tyrian purple echoing in every transaction. Still, for all their cleverness, the Phoenicians were also superstitious. You pause at a small shrine tucked between two cargo ramps. Inside, a miniature bronze statue of Melkart, the city's god-king, stares blankly at the harbor. Someone has left purple thread draped over his lap. Not gold. Not coins. Purple. That's how deep this dye runs. It isn't just trade. It's ritual. It's identity. You hear a dockworker curse as a jar cracks open, spilling crimson dye into the sea. He doesn't clean it. He bows, mutters something under his breath, and lets the tide take it. Offerings, even accidental, aren't to be undone. Back near the marketplace, a loud debate breaks out over a bundle of linen. The seller claims it's been double-dyed, soaked twice for extra saturation. The buyer isn't convinced. You sneak a peek. It does gleam with a kind of oily richness that makes your eyes water. Double dyeing was the luxury tier, reserved for kings, emperors, and the terrifyingly wealthy. But here it is, changing hands in a dockside hagglefest. The buyer finally caves, grumbling as he counts his coins. And just like that, another spool of purple heads off toward legend. Phoenician mornings aren't slow. They're choreographed. Every step, every curse, every roll of the merchant's eyes has been rehearsed 1,000 times. Even the seagulls seem to know where to land for crumbs. But beneath the rhythm is ambition. No one's here just for breakfast. Every crate loaded, every snail crushed, every finger stained purple pushes Tyre's reputation just a little further across the map. And you, wandering with dyed sandals and a nose that still remembers the snail vats, start to understand. This wasn't about color. It was about control. The Phoenicians woke early because the world was buying, and they were the only ones selling. You drift inland from the harbor, where the air is still thick with salt and yesterday's sweat, and into the open clamor of the Tyrian market. You don't know where to look first, there's just too much. 1,000 voices shout over each other, pitching olive oil, frankincense, carved ivory, and dried figs so sweet your teeth ache from just a sniff. But behind it all, beneath the chance and haggling and slap-slap of sandals on sun-hot stone, you start to notice something else, a kind of showmanship. Phoenician traders, it turns out, were absolute drama queens. There's a man selling saffron who swears his came from the sacred valleys of fire, which is a very poetic way to describe some random hillside in Anatolia. Another is waving sticks of cinnamon in the air, claiming they were stolen, yes, stolen, from dragons' nests. You're not buying that, and neither is the old woman beside you who spits on the ground and walks off. Still, someone's bound to pay extra for dragon spice eventually. Historians still argue whether the Phoenicians believed their own sales pitches or just leaned into the myth because it worked. After all, this is the same culture that once claimed purple dye was a divine gift from Melkart himself. If you're already selling mucus as treasure, why not sprinkle on a little legend? You pass a stall that promises its linen is soaked under 2 full moons for maximum softness. Another offers incense that repels demons and bad husbands. There's even a man selling sun-kissed dates that look suspiciously like the dusty leftovers from yesterday. But his beard is impressive, and his tunic is lined with thread that flashes violet in the sunlight. People believe him. Or at least, they want to. And that's the thing. Phoenician traders weren't just merchants, they were storytellers. They wove tales into textiles, folded myth into every amphora, until even the plainest goods shimmered with mystery. You could be buying goat cheese, but if it was said to come from a sacred pasture once grazed by divine goats, well, now it's cheese of the gods, and it's double the price. Some of it was harmless exaggeration. But occasionally, it got darker. You find yourself in a shadowy corner of the market where a heavy-lidded man whispers about tin, precious, rare, and allegedly pulled from the ends of the world. That could mean Britain. It could also mean someone's backyard near Carthage. There were maps, but only some people had them, and even fewer shared what they really knew. A young apprentice runs by, nearly toppling a basket of figs. His master shouts something sharp in Phoenician, and the boy disappears behind a tent flap. You glance over at the merchant's wares. He's got polished amber, fragments of ostrich eggs, even a monkey's paw preserved in salt. How much of it is real? No idea. But it looks fantastic. Phoenician markets were loud, crowded, and cleverly chaotic. You can't prove half the stories you hear. But that's the point. Certainty is cheap. Ambiguity sells. A cloth merchant grabs your wrist, not hard, just enough to get your attention. Feel this, he says. You do. It's soft. Incredibly soft. This was spun by the widows of Arwood during the mourning season, he says with the gravitas of a priest. It holds their sorrow. That's why it drapes like this. You want to laugh. But the cloth does fall beautifully. He names a price. You blink. He names a lower one. You blink again. He shrugs, wraps the cloth back up, and says, "You'll be back, and honestly? You might be." You overhear another merchant talking about wine aged in clay pots buried in sand dunes and turned under starlight. You're 90% sure that's nonsense. But you also want to taste it. Phoenician trade thrived on this edge between truth and illusion. And sometimes that illusion got political. There are stories, maybe true, maybe embellished, of kings demanding Phoenician dye but being sold look-alike cloth soaked in madder root or beet juice. The difference? Real purple didn't fade. Imposter dye ran like a scared thief the first time it rained. So, when nobles opened their royal robes to find them pink and soggy, guess who got blamed? Not the Phoenicians. They were already halfway across the sea. And then there were the secret recipes, the specific boiling times, the precise mix of seawater and snail glands, the rituals performed during the process. These were closely guarded, passed from family to family like sacred spells. You couldn't just become a purple dyer. You had to be born into it, or pay someone a lot of money to teach you, and even then, they might lie just a little, just enough to keep you always a step behind. You sit on a low wall, market noise washing over you like tide. A child plays nearby, dragging a string of old shells and singing to herself. You watch as a man shaves thin slices from a block of perfumed resin and another dips candles into crimson wax. And you realize, these people weren't just peddling goods. They were exporting dreams. In a world full of sameness, Phoenicians offered the extraordinary. Even if, sometimes, it smelled like snails and came from a sea-soaked lie. You leave the market with your head spinning, spices, lies, and the odd scent of honey-drenched goat meat clinging to your sleeves, and you follow the sound of hammers and creaking ropes back to the edge of the docks. But you don't stop at the piers. No, tonight you're boarding a ship. A Phoenician trade galley, sleek and low to the water, with its hull dark from pitch and its sail furled like a waiting secret. The crew doesn't seem thrilled to have a straggler aboard, but they're too busy to argue. You find a spot near some bundled cloth and hold tight as the ship pushes off with a groan and a splash, joining a slow-moving caravan of merchant vessels drifting west, away from Tyre and into open waters. You pass Cyprus first, its hills faint and blue in the distance. Then roads, where the locals love Phoenician goods but not always Phoenician attitudes. By the second week, the coastline begins to blur, just more jagged rock and scrubby brush. And then, almost without warning, you're at a new shore. Not Greece. Not Egypt. Somewhere else. Phoenician ships were faster than most, but it wasn't just speed that carried them far. It was boldness. You step onto a narrow beach where no one speaks your language and realize this is the magic trick. They go where no one else dares. Historians still argue whether the Phoenicians truly reached as far as Britain or even circled Africa long before the Portuguese. Some say it's ridiculous. Others point to eerie bits of purple cloth found in odd corners of the world and raise their eyebrows meaningfully. You're not sure what to believe, but the shipyard doesn't care about academic debates. It's just landed in an Iberian inlet where the hills shimmer with silver and the locals eye you like you might be edible. But the captain? He smiles. He opens a crate of gleaming purple fabric and starts making friends in the oldest language of all, luxury. You help unload the wares, not because you're helpful but because the dock is steep and slippery. The air here is different, damp and mossy, with a hint of metal. The Iberians may not wear robes or burn incense, but they know value when they see it. They want purple. They want whatever this strange ship has brought. And the Phoenicians, clever as ever, oblige. You sit near the captain that night, chewing something leathery and vaguely fishy. He tells you that just last month, a cousin of his dropped anchor in a place with black sand and glowfish, which probably means volcanic rock and bioluminescent squid, but who's correcting him? Not you. Not when the firelight makes his stories feel real. And what stories? Phoenician traders turned every voyage into a legend. If they found a place with no roads, they carved paths with coin and charm. If a king refused them, they found a queen who wouldn't. If locals doubted them, they dropped a bolt of purple cloth in the mud, and suddenly, everyone was curious. But sometimes, those new harbors weren't so welcoming. You wake the next morning to shouts. Something's wrong. A crate has vanished. So has one of the crew. The locals are suddenly less friendly, and you can practically smell the tension in the air. The captain steps in fast, gift cloth, generous apologies, and promises of future trades. Crisis managed. Barely. The ship sails again at dusk, quiet and wary. You hear the crew whispering about old stories, about other traders who vanished on distant shores, never seen again. Some say they were sacrificed. Others say they stayed willingly, seduced by new lands and simpler lives. You wonder which you choose. There's something romantic about sailing into the unknown, yes, but also something undeniably stupid. No GPS. No reliable maps. Just stars and instinct and maybe a suspiciously talkative parrot someone picked up in Crete. Still, it worked. Phoenician ships reached Italy, North Africa, Greece, and maybe even places beyond. You spot markings on the mast, tiny notches for each new landfall. The mast looks like a scarred tree, each line a memory, a risk, a sail. The ship docks next at a half-built harbor, another Phoenician outpost in the making. There's a bit of stonework, a few tents, and a whole lot of ambition. This is how they did it. Not with armies, but with crates. Not with flags, but with fabrics and oils and stories. And purple, always purple. You haul linen alongside a teenager who's been on the sea since age 9. He doesn't remember land that didn't smell like ropes and resin. He says he's seen islands where birds scream like babies and the trees drip sap like blood. You nod, half asleep, half hypnotized. The truth? Doesn't matter. By the time the goods reach Tyre again, these half-true adventures will become sales pitches. And somewhere far from home, another beach waits. Another harbor half-ready. Another story just beginning to form in the salty wind. You dock again, not at Tyre, but at a place the locals call Theros, on the island of Sardinia, where the wind smells of crushed myrtle and the buildings huddle low, like they're trying to stay out of the weather. This is no metropolis. No sprawl of stone and ambition like Tyre or Sidon. But the Phoenicians are here too, because of course they are. They're everywhere. This settlement is small, maybe 100 souls. But it has what matters. A protected cove, a stone altar to ball, and 2 stalls already hawking. What else? Purple cloth. You realize, with a chuckle, that the dye has arrived before you did. There's a rhythm to these outposts. You've seen it now more than once. First the beach, then the hearth, then the market stall. A pottery kiln. A dye pit. And finally, the temple, rising like an anchor in stone. Phoenicians don't colonize with spears. They colonize with storefronts. You walk the dusty main lane as two local children kick a ball made from bundled rags. Their mother calls out to them in a tongue you don't recognize. But when she turns to haggle over some incense cones with the Phoenician trader, she slips into his language like a second skin. Trade has a way of teaching you new words fast. Historians still debate whether these Phoenician settlements were truly self-sufficient or just long tentacles reaching out from Tyre. Some had governors, others had councils. A few may have even evolved independently. But what they all had was connection. Routes back home. Messages. Ships. Cloth. Always cloth. You pause near a shop where dyed fabric hangs like tropical vines. The owner is carving something into a tablet. Not a receipt. A complaint. Apparently, a rival merchant 3 huts down has been selling inferior purple to visiting dignitaries. The scandal is both ridiculous and deadly serious. Reputation, you see, travels faster than wind. You started to notice how Phoenician traders adapt wherever they land. Their gods get new names. Their tunics change shape. Their language picks up strange vowels. You pass a Phoenician who greets you in a Greek accent, then curses in Egyptian. He's probably never been to either place. Doesn't matter. He sells to both. You stop to rest under the half-shade of a fig tree planted awkwardly beside a stone cistern. It's cracked, and a lizard scuttles along its lip. A man joins you, older, with sun-dried skin and a nose that has clearly met several walls in its time. He points to your stained robe, purple at the edges from earlier loading duty, and smiles. Royal blood, he jokes. You shake your head. He nods anyway. He tells you, between bites of something roasted and smoky, about a harbor to the north that tried to ban Phoenician cloth. Called it corrupting, too flashy, too foreign. Within a year, the ban was lifted, not because anyone changed their mind, but because the locals started making copies and selling them cheaper. Phoenician influence wasn't just in the product. It was in the idea. The idea that something could be worth more because it looked like it came from somewhere else. A trick of the sea. Later that night, you wander past the outskirts of the outpost, where the ground slopes toward a sleepy lagoon. A half-built ship lies on its side, ribs exposed like a whale skeleton. Young men sit on the beam, smoking something that smells like damp cedar and boredom. They tell you, between jokes and yawns, about a place farther west, farther than anyone's supposed to go. Ocean too wide, one says. But the wind knows the way. Phoenicians were nothing if not curious. Even when told don't go there, they went. Even when told you'll die, they smiled and asked if they could trade first. And so you begin to understand, every settlement is a dare. A whisper to the world saying we made it. A flag, not in cloth, but in smell, those snail vats never lie. A marker of presence. Of pressure. Of purple. You return to the main square as a festival begins. Children dance around a pole wound with dyed ribbons. Some sing in Phoenician, others in local tongue. There's fish stew, date cakes, and a man trying to sell you a necklace made from goat teeth. It's joyful, a little chaotic, but unmistakably Phoenician in flavor. You sit beside the trader from earlier, watching firelight flicker on cloth that glows like dusk. And just before sleep finds you, you think, this isn't a city. It's a message. And it's written in the language of sails, spices, and just a hint of royal purple. You wake up with your back against a sun-warmed wall and the taste of dried figs still clinging to your tongue. Somewhere nearby, a pot clatters, a goat sneezes, and a child giggles before being shushed by a groggy merchant. You stretch, bones creaking, and notice the soft sheen of dawn on the dyed ribbons still fluttering from last night's dancing pole. Then the breeze shifts. And oh, dear listener, you know that smell. Like an old friend returning from a long journey and refusing to bathe, it creeps up your nostrils, the unmistakable, wet iron stink of fermenting mollusk glands. Purple's price, purple's perfume. You follow the reek like a bloodhound, past sleepy tents and toward the very edge of the outpost, where two Phoenicians are already hard at work over a row of shallow dying troughs. You step closer, and your sandals squish. So begins your first-hand encounter with the most prestigious, most revolting artisanal process in the ancient world. The dying pits look like shallow stone bathtubs filled with what might be seawater, or vinegar, or liquefied sin. Floating in one is the gelatinous residue of a dozen snails. In another, strips of cloth soak, going from pale cream to a greenish hue that, wait for it, slowly darkens, deepens, shifts into something between bruised plum and molten dusk. Tyrian purple, the color that launched 1,000 gags. Historians still argue whether the Phoenicians were the first to master this fermentation process or merely perfected what coastal cultures had already begun. What we do know, their version stuck, literally and figuratively. You listen as one dyer explains that the secret lies in letting it rot just right. Not too long, not too short. The gland, tucked inside the murex snail, must be extracted with care. If punctured wrong, it spoils. If left too long in sunlight, it evaporates. And the amount of dye it produces? About a single drop per snail. That's not a joke. That's the math. So, when you watch the apprentice carry a basket containing maybe 500 snails, you realize that might yield enough dye for a collar. One collar. The rest of the tunic? That's another few thousand mollusks. And that's if nothing goes wrong. You peek into a bucket where the glands have just been crushed and stirred into brine. It looks like soup for witches and smells like betrayal. The workers don't flinch. This is their life, their heritage, and, in many ways, their gold mine. You help stir a vat and immediately regret it. Your hands reek. They will continue to reek for at least a week. But when the cloth comes out, purple deep enough to drown in, you almost forgive the smell. Almost. The weird part? The dye changes color with air exposure. At first, the fabric is a pale blue-green. Then, minute by minute, it darkens, deepens, becomes something regal. Magical, almost. You feel like you're watching an alchemical transformation. Which, in a sense, you are. One dyer jokes that it's the breath of the gods. Another says it's the snails seeking revenge. Probably both. Nearby, an older woman is cutting dyed linen into strips. She doesn't wear purple, too expensive. But she touches it like it's sacred. This dye isn't just luxury. It's identity. You learn that in Tyre, only high priests could wear fully purple robes. In Sidon, it was royalty. In other cities? Illegal for commoners. A color with a price and a fence. And yet, the fence leaks. Some middle-class families dyed just the edges of their sleeves, enough to suggest prestige, without triggering a fine. Some traders add Phoenician purple labels to second-rate matter-dyed cloth, hoping buyers won't notice until the first rain. And some rogue artisans? They've started mixing snail dye with cheaper colorants to stretch the yield. You smell fraud before you see it. A worker panics as his vat goes sour, literally. Too much sunlight, too little salt. The cloth he pulls out looks gray and lifeless. He curses in 3 languages and tosses it aside. That's a week's work wasted. Purple does not forgive. But sometimes, when it works, when the ratios are right and the fabric sings in saturated color, it feels like sorcery. Like something forbidden. You hold one finished bolt and swear the purple moves in the light, almost metallic, almost alive. This, you realize, is why emperors lose their minds over it. Why Julius Caesar refused to wear anything else. Why Cleopatra's sails were said to shimmer violet in the wind. It's not just color. It's power, condensed. You wander away from the vats, your eyes watering, your fingers stained, and find a quiet ledge overlooking the sea. The sun's risen higher now, bouncing off the water and the distant sails. And for a moment, with your nose ruined and your tunic ruined, you understand something essential. The Phoenicians didn't love purple because it was pretty. They loved it because it was theirs. Hard-earned, hard-made, and undeniably rare. And in a world where imitation ruled, this was a color that could not lie. You leave the dye pits behind, though your nose won't forget them anytime soon, and make your way along a narrow coastal road carved into the hillside. The path hugs the cliffs tightly, as if the rocks themselves want to whisper secrets of trade winds and shipwrecks into your ear. And just ahead, nestled between the sea and the mountains, is a settlement unlike the others. It's still Phoenician, yes, but different. Larger, louder, hungrier. Carthage. You don't know it yet, but you're standing in what will one day become a colossus. A city of elephants, legions, and long grudges. But for now, it's still young. Still figuring itself out. You walk its streets like a time traveler in soft sandals. Carthage is no scrappy outpost. This is the first real franchise. The Tyrian blueprint, but bigger, taller walls, busier harbors, more purple, and more ambition. Historians still argue whether Carthage was planned from the beginning as a superpower, or just grew too big to ignore. Either way, it carries the DNA of its Phoenician parents: maritime cunning, mercantile greed, and a soft spot for snail mucus. You wander into the central market and immediately feel the shift. This isn't the poetic drama of Tyre. This is commerce with sharp elbows. Traders bark prices like military orders. Goods are inspected with ruthless efficiency. If the linen isn't double-dyed, it's docked in price. If the olive oil isn't golden clear, it's gone. Carthage doesn't have time for fables. It deals in volume. Yet, even here, purple reigns. You pass by a vault-like warehouse guarded by men with curved knives and serious eyebrows. Inside, rows of bolts gleam with every shade of imperial dusk. The price is so high it's carved into ivory instead of shouted. And it sells. You trail a merchant who's negotiating a shipment of these bolts bound for Syracuse. He argues not just over weight, but scent. If it doesn't stink, it doesn't sell, he insists. It's a strange truth. The most expensive cloth in the world comes with a warning label for your nose. But Carthage doesn't stop at cloth. You step into a plaza where dozens of goods from across 3 continents are being tallied. Cedar planks from Lebanon, spices from Arabia, grain from Egypt, silver from Iberia, and in the middle of it all, a Phoenician coin, small, round, stamped with a horse and a palm tree. Currency. You blink. Until now, it's all been barter, weight, and promises. But here in Carthage, money is beginning to matter. Traders are using standardized measures, keeping records, ensuring cargo. This is no longer just a port, it's an engine, and it's running hot. You sit beside a stonemason carving Phoenician letters into a tablet. You ask what it says. A name, he replies, of a woman who funded 3 ships. A woman? He nods. Phoenician culture, you learn, allowed female merchants to hold enormous power, especially here in Carthage, where matrilineal influence, inheritance through the mother, left its mark. Some of the wealthiest traders on this coast aren't grizzled men with sunburned necks. They're widows with sharp eyes and sharper ledgers. It's one of the many quirks that make Carthage feel like its own beast. Same gods, yes, Melkart, Astarte, Baal, but temples here are taller, more ornate. You visit one at sunset and find garlands of purple cloth draped over a statue. Offerings, prayers, taxes. It's all blurred together. Even in worship, purple is the currency. You hear a commotion down at the harbor and rush to see what's happening. A ship's returned early, storm damage. Half its hull is scorched black. The captain limps ashore, cradling a satchel like it's a baby. Not gold. Not wine. Purple. He opens it to reveal 3 bolts, tightly sealed, untouched by fire or salt. The crowd sighs like it's just seen a miracle. Because they have. Purple survived. Again. You're starting to see a pattern. Carthage, like Tyre, is built around this dye, not just economically, but psychologically. It's the thing they make that no one else can. Their fingerprint on history. Their voice in a crowded chorus of empires. Later that night, you sit on the sea wall, watching the moon ripple in black water. A young boy joins you, bare feet dangling. He's learning to write, he says. Wants to become a trader. You ask him why. He shrugs. So I can go far. See things. Bring them home. It's simple. It's timeless. It's exactly what Phoenician traders have done for centuries. And as you look back at Carthage, its torchlit piers, its rows of anchored ships, its warehouses bursting with the most expensive stink in history, you realize something. This isn't a colony. It's a lighthouse. A beacon built of ambition, stitched with purple, and shining out into the wide, whispering dark. You find yourself in a quieter part of Carthage now, past the clamor of the docks and the sting of murex vats, where the breeze cools and the walls close in. Here, shaded courtyards hum with a different kind of power, not the shout of trade, but the scratch of styluses. You step into a small room, modest, sunlit, its walls lined with palm leaf scrolls and chipped clay tablets. There's no gold here, no purple cloth, no ivory boxes. Just letters. Tiny, careful letters, etched, inked, and whispered into permanence. This is a Phoenician scriptorium, and you're about to see the quiet revolution that might have been their most lasting export of all. Writing. Now, you're used to Egyptian hieroglyphs, gorgeous, elaborate, and absolutely exhausting to learn. Or maybe you've glimpsed Mesopotamian cuneiform, wedges, strokes, the written equivalent of a migraine. But Phoenician? Different beast entirely. Compact. Sharp. Straight to the point. You watch as a boy traces the character for Bet, the ancestor of our letter B. No pictures. No flourishes. Just sound. Phoenician script doesn't tell you what something looks like, it tells you how it sounds. You blink, realizing this isn't just a system of symbols. This is the first true alphabet. Historians still debate how much credit the Phoenicians deserve for inventing it outright. Some argue it evolved from earlier proto-writing systems. But what's undeniable is this: they made it portable, simple, teachable, and more importantly, sellable. Traders used it to tally goods. Priests carved it into offerings. Sailors scratched it onto cargo crates so they'd know not to flip the amphory containing pickled fish. And out here in Carthage, it's blossomed into something else entirely. You trail a young scribe to a shrine wall where names of donors have been etched in Phoenician letters. One name glows in gold leaf, Yatamble, a cloth magnate. Beside it, a quiet detail, a mark for each year he paid temple tithe, recorded not in pictures or prayers, but cold, sharp consonants. This isn't just writing. It's accounting. It's bureaucracy. It's empire. And it spreads like wildfire. You sit beneath an olive tree as a teacher drills 3 students on the alphabet. They chant letters like a hymn. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet. You hear echoes of modern alphabets forming in their mouths. Latin, Greek, even Hebrew. All born from this dusty script. From these sea-worn traders who, let's be honest, probably just wanted to write down who owed them money. A scroll passes your way. It's a contract, nothing dramatic. 1 crate of dyed cloth exchanged for a bronze mirror and 2 jars of fig paste. The language is spare, the characters elegant. The signature? Just a name, but it hums with certainty. Because writing, here, is more than a record. It's identity. You meet a merchant who boasts he learned to write before he could count. How else can I prove I own YSL? He shrugs. A mouth lies. A letter doesn't. You almost ask him about forgeries, but then you spot the dagger tucked into his belt and reconsider. Phoenician script begins to pop up everywhere. On temple walls. On ship manifests. On tiny lead tags tied to export jars. Even on graffiti, one reads Zimri was here. He smells better than the Murex pits. Still better than most Yelp reviews. Back in the scriptorium, a girl no older than 9 is copying a hymn. She's the daughter of a sailor, but she's got the hand of a queen. Her letters are perfect. Her ink strokes sure. You ask her what the hymn means. She shrugs. It's old, she says. But we write it so it doesn't disappear. That sticks with you. You leave the room, your fingers still dusty with chalk, and glance out over the rooftops of Carthage. Somewhere below, the dye vats continue to bubble. The ships are being loaded. The coins are changing hands. But up here, quiet and slow, letters are landing like raindrops on history. You realize something as you descend the steps. Cloth fades. Coins vanish. Even temples crumble. But alphabets? Alphabets travel. They sneak into foreign tongues, hitch rides on scrolls and soldiers, and whisper their syllables into the bones of entire civilizations. And the Phoenicians? They knew this. Maybe not in those exact words, but in instinct. In action. In the way they chose 22 characters over 1,000 pictures. In the way they trained their daughters to write beside their sons. In the way they carved names into walls not to impress, but to remain. So tonight, as the lamps flicker on and ink dries on 100 scraps of bark, you sit beside a cooling brazier and wonder, is this how history begins? Not in battle. Not in stone. But in the quiet scratching of a stylus. And the purple-stained hand that guides it. The sun is still low when you step into the courtyard of a small house at the edge of Carthage. It's quiet, almost too quiet, until you round the corner and hear the steady thrum of drums, low, slow, hypnotic. At first, you think it's a celebration. A trader's return, maybe. A lucky shipment. But as you approach the sound, you see it's something older. Stranger. Ritual. In a city ruled by merchants, gods still hold stock. And the Phoenicians, oh, they carried their gods everywhere. You stand near the threshold of a modest open-air temple where 4 pillars lean slightly, like they've agreed to remain upright only out of habit. Inside, incense curls toward the sky, and a statue of Astarte, the goddess of love, war, and seafaring, gazes down with eyes that probably once held gemstones. Now, they're just hollow, but no less watchful. Offerings lay at her feet, olive oil, dyed cloth, dried rose petals, and even a small carved snail shell, painted violet. It's not subtle. It's not meant to be. You realize this isn't just a place of faith. It's a portfolio. A resume. These are traders asking for good weather, low tariffs, and the strength to outbid a rival in Tripoli. Phoenician religion traveled like their goods, compact, adaptable, and surprisingly persistent. You hear a man murmuring prayers in a dialect that's half Tyrian and half Numidian. Doesn't matter. The gods know what he means. He bows 3 times and then spits, not at the statue, but toward the sea. Just in case. Historians still argue whether Phoenician religion was deeply felt or simply tradition worn like a ring, part identity, part insurance. But when you see the look in the priestess's eyes as she sings Astarte's name into the rising light, you feel something stir. This isn't performance. It's partnership. You follow a procession through narrow streets, only a dozen people, barefoot, bearing jars of wine and sprigs of cypress. At the head, a young boy with purple threaded cuffs carries a flame inside a stone bowl. The flame doesn't flicker. Even the wind knows not to interrupt. The procession winds past homes, market stalls, even a loading dock, where 2 men pause mid-argument to bow. That's the thing about Phoenician gods. They move. They travel. Unlike the landlocked deities of some inland empires, these gods have passports. They board ships. They ride waves. They sit beside sailors and whisper over open cargo. You remember Melkart, the god of Tyre, the city's divine founder, part Hercules, part storm spirit. His shrines exist in every Phoenician port. Some are no more than carved stones beside the shore. Others are massive sanctuaries with bronze lions guarding the gates. But they all smell of burnt cedar and salt. You visit one such shrine, built into the hillside above Carthage's harbor. It's modest but well kept, with a brazier burning low and steady. A fisherman kneels beside it, rubbing purple cloth between his palms before setting it down. Purple brings luck, he tells you. It's from the sea, like him. He nods toward the horizon, where a single ship cuts across the early light. You look back at the shrine. There's no altar, no treasure, no stained glass. Just ash, salt, and quiet devotion. You realize the gods of the Phoenicians don't demand grand architecture. They want loyalty. They want presence. You visit a home later that day where the family altar shares space with cooking pots and storage jars. Above the hearth hangs a wooden plaque carved with a stylized crescent, the symbol of Tanit, a goddess of fertility and the moon. A dried bundle of purple thread dangles beside it like a charm. The mother tells you her daughter was born during a dye harvest. She cried purple, she jokes. You're not entirely sure she's joking. Everywhere you turn, belief and business are braided like rope. Sailors wear amulets shaped like fish and shells. Traders pour out a sip of wine before every voyage. Cloth is blessed. Even ledgers are sometimes marked with sacred initials. You flip one open and see the characters for Ball Protect, scrawled in the margins between item counts and prices. You hear whispers, too, of darker rituals, of child sacrifice in times of drought, of secret rites held far from the public eye. Historians still debate how common these were, or if they were exaggerated by enemies of Carthage. The truth? Hard to know. But you sense that fear and reverence walk closely together in Phoenician faith. At sunset, you return to the Temple of Astarte, where a new offering has appeared, a swatch of freshly dyed linen so deep it looks black in the fading light. It flutters gently, as if breathing. You sit for a moment on the temple steps, watching shadows stretch and mingle. A priestess passes by, her robes heavy with perfume and salt. She pauses. You carry the smell of murex, she says, smiling. Our gods know it well. You nod, a little embarrassed. She bows and disappears into the night. And as the stars rise, you realize the truth of Phoenician religion isn't found in doctrine, but in movement. It sails. It barters. It adapts. It survives. Like the traders who carry it. Like the cloth that stains their hands. Like the gods, riding silent beside them, on every wave. You're woken not by seagulls or sunrise, but by hushed voices arguing in a back alley. Not shouting, nothing so reckless. This is a different sort of tension. Quiet, calculated, intentional. You don't understand the words at first, but you catch the tone. Secrecy. Phoenician traders weren't just master merchants. They were information brokers. And sometimes, that meant their cargo wasn't bolts of cloth, but whispers. You creep along the edge of a sandstone wall until you spot them, two men, one in a Tyrian-cut robe, the other in a woolen tunic more common in inland Carthage. They're passing something small between them, maybe a carved seal or a folded piece of parchment. Neither man looks up. When they part, they move fast in opposite directions. A merchant watching from a balcony murmurs to himself, "Copper routes." Probably, he doesn't explain. You follow the man in the Tyrian robe at a safe distance. He blends easily into the street crowd, even stops to buy dates from a vendor, but you notice the rhythm of his gait. It's too smooth. That's not a trader's walk. That's a courier's. He disappears into a stone building, one of those anonymous side offices near the docks where prices are set, ship schedules adjusted, and trade deals corrected before they're made public. You start to realize, beneath the incense and the perfume and the purple, there's another economy here. A quieter one. One built on maps that no one else sees. Historians still argue how much of Phoenician trade was driven by espionage, if you can call it that. Some believe they kept metal sources secret on purpose, creating the illusion of rarity. Others think they deliberately misled rival powers about where their goods originated. You pause by a small shrine to Melkart where a mariner leaves a carved turtle, probably a coded message for someone else. You've stumbled into the darker dye of trade, the world of secrets. A woman sidles up to you near a spice stand. Her eyes are sharp, her fingers stained with turmeric. She doesn't introduce herself, but she asks if you've heard of Tartessos, a rich land, possibly mythical, full of silver and ruled by a king with a golden mouth. You nod cautiously. She smirks. The silver's real. The king? Just very good at hiring singers. She's been there, she says. But not as a trader. As a mapper. A listener. She dropped off cloth and picked up stories. Shipwreck rumors. Copper deposit locations. Inland routes the Greeks don't know about. Phoenician knowledge doesn't always travel on scrolls. Sometimes, it rides on a face. A fake smile. A passing joke about water depth. You're invited, strangely, to a backroom meeting, nothing too formal. Just a gathering of traders who, shall we say, prefer discretion. There's wine, but not too much. No names, no questions. The conversations dance between topics, shipping routes, anchor forging methods, temple tariffs. But beneath it all, you sense the coded layer. One man casually mentions that the northern winds are less cruel this year, which might mean it's safe to attempt a previously treacherous route. Another says his cousin saw Roman ships with Phoenician-style sails. Everyone pretends not to notice the implication. Someone's been copying their work. Espionage in Phoenician terms wasn't always cloak and dagger. Sometimes it was just watching, listening, recording what others missed. You remember the scribes and the careful ledgers. Maybe they weren't just keeping track of sales. Maybe they were tracking patterns, price shifts, weather cycles, grain shortages, supply chains. And suddenly, purple cloth feels like a magician's cape, a beautiful distraction while the real trick happens elsewhere. You sit near a candlelit table where two older traders discuss iron production in Sardinia. One mentions a recent incident involving a missing delivery and a suspicious fire. The other responds by adjusting his ring in a particular way. You don't know what it means. You're not supposed to. Later that night, you pass a ship being loaded for a voyage east, not unusual. But every crate is unmarked. No symbols. No letters. Not even a port of origin. It's not headed for trade. It's headed for testing. Phoenicians, you're beginning to understand, weren't just merchants. They were analysts, strategists, spies. When needed, they sold goods to strangers, then bought back influence with the profits. And with each shipment, they learned a little more, grew a little stronger. One carved ivory tablet near the harbor reads, "The clever sail farther." You smile. Because now you know what they meant. Farther isn't just distance. It's knowledge. It's knowing which ports are safe before they close, which gods to bribe, which laws will change next season. It's owning the map before anyone else knows they're on it. And if someone asks how you got it, you just hand them a bolt of purple cloth and say, "We've always been here." You're back on the docks again, the boards creaking beneath your feet as you pace slowly past ships in various stages of readiness, some waiting for cargo, others already straining at their ropes like hounds on a leash. The morning sun glints off bronze fittings and polished hulls, and for a moment, the harbor hums with routine. Safe. Predictable. Then you see the weapons. Not the ceremonial daggers traders like to wear for flair. No, these are longer, sharper, practical. Phoenician spears, stored in plain sight, leaning against a stack of purple-dyed crates like they belong there, which, of course, they do. Because for all their charm and sandal-grin diplomacy, the Phoenicians could be aggressive. Not often, not loudly, but precisely. You pass a pair of guards flanking a cargo galley. They're not soldiers by uniform. Phoenicians didn't really do uniforms, but their stances, their eyes, the subtle calluses on their hands? Trained. You know it when you see it. They're here not to fight for glory, but to protect investments. You overhear a trader complain that a Greek vessel tried to inspect his shipment near Crete. The crew retaliated. Quickly. They didn't expect us to have archers, he says with a shrug, like that's normal. Maybe it is. Historians still debate whether Phoenician ships were lightly armed by default or secretly outfitted for defense. Some say they had retractable rams beneath the waterline. Others claim they used flaming pitch pots launched by slings. But one thing's certain, they weren't helpless. You climb aboard a smaller craft preparing to head towards Sicily. The captain lets you aboard only after checking your fingers, still stained faintly purple from a previous dive vat incident. That's how we know you're not just a spy, he jokes. Maybe. The ship's crew is lean, efficient, and not terribly chatty. You spot weapons hidden under canvas near the helm. Not polished. Used. You're sailing with traders, yes, but also part-time pirates, part-time mercenaries, and full-time survivalists. Because not every port welcomes Phoenicians. In some harbors, they're accused of undercutting prices, stealing customers, even swindling kings. You hear tales of riots in Corinth, boycotts in Byblos, and one particularly dramatic standoff in Euboea where a Phoenician merchant supposedly talked down an entire garrison by offering them, what else? Purple sashes and matching boots. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes, they had to use the spears. You dock at a small coastal town where the reception is frosty. Traders from a rival culture, Greeks, maybe, already occupy half the market square. You sense the tension immediately. Everyone's friendly, but no one's smiling. Your captain leans toward you and mutters, "They think we cheat." You raise an eyebrow. He nods. They're right. Phoenicians were known for clever measurements. Slightly thinner cloth bolts. Amphory with thicker bottoms to reduce volume. One trader's scale has a weight carved from lead, painted to look like bronze. They're not lies, the captain says. They're negotiations. You walk past a stall selling fake Tyrian purple, cheap dye made from madder root and fig juice. It's close enough to fool the untrained eye. But your nose tells the truth. No snail stink. No pride. Just color without cost. You spot a Phoenician merchant arguing with a local magistrate over tariffs. It escalates quickly. Words turn to shouting. Shouting to shoving. Then, a knife flashes. Not drawn, just revealed, resting calmly in the merchant's sash. The magistrate stops mid-sentence. This is the edge where trade meets intimidation. The Phoenicians rarely sought violence. But they never pretended to be saints. Back aboard the ship, you listen to stories shared over grilled sardines and slightly spoiled wine. One sailor recalls an ambush in the Adriatic, pirates, or perhaps just angry locals. We lost one man, he says quietly. But we kept the cloth. You wonder how many of these traders began as warriors, or if war was simply another extension of trade. After all, if your cargo is worth its weight in gold, and there's no one to protect it but you learn to fight. You remember that amphora filled with tools back in Tyre, the one that clinked too much. You remember the missing crewman in Iberia. You remember the child who danced around a purple pole, whose father wore a sword at his hip inside the dye pit. Phoenician peace was never free. It was enforced. As you disembark the next morning, a new ship glides into port. Its hull is scorched. Its sail torn. But its crew? Grinning. Pirates tried us, someone laughs. We gave them a rope and a knife. You're not sure which was used. But the pirates didn't stay. And the purple, of course, made it through. You're back on land now, watching the purple. Not just a swatch of fabric anymore, but an entire procession. It flows past you like a river of dusk, robes, shawls, and head wraps steeped so richly in Tyrian dye that it almost hurts your eyes to look. These aren't traders. They're nobles, priests, daughters of kings, envoys from lands so far you're not sure if they're real or just very detailed stories. And all of them want one thing, to be seen in purple. Because by now, Tyrian purple isn't just expensive, it's explosive. Rome, you hear, is completely obsessed. So are parts of Persia. Even Egypt, with its centuries of color worship, has started importing Phoenician cloth by the cartload. You listen to an Egyptian buyer tell a merchant, "We will bury our dead in gold, but our living must wear purple." It's not just fashion anymore. It's diplomacy. It's currency. It's identity. One robe dyed with authentic murex extract could cost more than a year's wages. One bolt of cloth could buy a ship, or bribe a judge, or settle a war. You watch two rival emissaries square off in a plaza, both wearing nearly identical cloaks. But one's purple is just a shade deeper, richer. The cloth glows faintly in the shade like it remembers the sun. The other emissary notices. He tries to hide it. He fails. Historians still argue whether purple became valuable because it was rare, or whether the Phoenicians made it rare on purpose. Supply control, selective partnerships, region-specific dyes, they had all the tricks. Some believe Tyre deliberately destroyed murex colonies in rival ports to ensure exclusivity. Could be true. Wouldn't be surprising. You stop at a stall where a merchant unfurls a roll of double-dyed linen. It's almost black in the middle, with edges that flicker crimson when the light strikes just right. "This went to the pharaoh's cousin," he says. "But the cousin died. Now it's yours." He names a price that makes you want to cry. But then you touch the cloth. And maybe, just maybe, it's worth it. You start noticing the purple everywhere now. In statues of rulers, whose robes have been painted in faint pigment. In temple murals, where gods stretch their violet-cloaked arms across the sky. In graffiti, where someone scrawled "I touched a robe once" beneath a stylized drawing of a weeping face. You even see it in coinage, Phoenician currency sometimes stamped with a snail symbol, just subtle enough to wink at those in the know. A reminder, we made this color. You didn't. In Carthage, purple was elevated. In Rome, it was enshrined. Emperors began hoarding it. At one point, purple was so tightly controlled in Roman society that anyone outside the imperial family caught wearing it could be executed. You sit beside a Roman merchant who lowers his voice when talking about unlicensed purple. He shows you a tunic edge, a scrap, really. Illegal. Glorious. You ask if he's afraid. He shrugs. A little. But have you seen what it does to candlelight? And you have. That's the curse of it. Once you've seen true Tyrian purple, everything else looks like it's trying too hard. At a royal wedding in the Phoenician quarter, the bride's veil is triple dipped. It practically levitates in the light, like the night sky sewn into cloth. Guests sigh audibly. Someone faints, probably from excitement. Or the dye fumes. Hard to say. You sneak around the ceremony to the prep tent, where dyers are packing up. One is missing 2 fingers. Boiling accident, he says. But look how deep the color runs. He's not sad. He's proud. You realize this isn't just work to them. It's heritage. Calling. Sacrifice. You glance at your own tunic, still blotched with second-hand dye, smelling faintly of snails and salt. You look ridiculous. But somehow, you feel taller. More legitimate. As if the color is a passport, and you've finally been stamped. Later, you stroll through a market at twilight where a new shipment has just arrived from Sidon. Buyers clamor for position. Elbows fly. Coins clatter. The merchant raises his hands and says, "Only those who understand the weight of purple may hold it." He's being dramatic, but also completely serious. You hear a child beg her mother for a single ribbon. "Just one thread," she whispers, "so I can feel like a queen." And in that moment, watching 2 sweaty men nearly wrestle over a handkerchief, you understand the madness. Purple has become myth. A color that doesn't just shimmer. It declares. It tells stories of gods and gold, of storms and voyages and blood. It wraps the fragile ego of rulers like a protective spell. It perfumes ambition with the scent of rotten glory. And it works. Every time. You're following a dye master now, an older man, thin as rope, his back bent from decades of leaning over boiling vats and fermentation pits. He doesn't say much, just gestures for you to keep up as he leads you through a narrow alley between two houses in Sidon. The walls are streaked violet. Even the stray cats here look like they've been brushed with purple dust. At the far end of the alley, you reach a door so warped and sun-bleached it looks forgotten. But the old man pulls it open with a practiced hand, and inside you find something unexpected. Not a workshop. A vault. You step into a chamber where cloth hangs like banners from a war you've never heard of. Each bolt is carefully wrapped, labeled, and stored by year, region, and depth of color. It's not flashy. It's reverent. This is archival purple. The master picks up one piece dated to a decade ago. It's still vibrant. Dark. Alive. Double-dyed, he says simply. From the last good Murex season, he runs a finger across the fabric's edge, and even that gesture feels sacred. You'd expect purple to fade. But the opposite is true. Tyrian purple grows stronger with time. Historians still debate why. Some say it's the complex chemical structure of dibromo indigo, the compound created in the Murex fermentation process. Others think it's about how the dye bonds with the fabric at a molecular level. The scientific details are murky, but the visual proof is here, hanging around you, glowing softly in the shadows. You touch one of the oldest bolts. It feels warm, not from temperature, but from memory. This color has survived, not just the centuries, but the oceans, the fires, the politics, the plagues. It refuses to die. The master shows you another sample, found in a tomb, he says. The cloth had wrapped a priest's staff. It still stained his gloves when he unwrapped it. Imagine that, he chuckles. 3,000 years, and it still bites. You ask if he's ever died with Murex himself. He pauses. Only once, he says. It stains your soul, not just your skin. You're not sure if he's joking. Back outside, you notice something strange. A merchant's robe, hanging in the sun. At first glance, it looks faded, washed out. But then a cloud passes overhead, and suddenly, boom, it deepens, shifts, becomes rich again. The purple hides, then blooms, depending on the light. It's like the cloth breathes. You watch a noble woman walk past, her veil trailing behind her like smoke. Children stare. Even the goats stop chewing for a moment. That's the thing about Tyrian purple, it doesn't demand attention. It absorbs it. Later that day, you visit a small shop run by a woman with silver hair and one eye. She sells offcuts, scraps, fragments of cloth so small they can't cover anything but the truth. She lets you sift through a basket. There's one square that catches your eye, not the darkest, not the most vibrant, but somehow familiar. It's soft, faintly sweet-smelling. You ask about it. Shipwreck salvage, she says. Cloth never worn. Still perfect. And it is. You imagine that cloth underwater, the color holding even as the ship split apart, as salt chewed the wood and barnacles claimed the whole. The dye didn't care. It clung. It kept its promise. You begin to see it everywhere now. In a wall painting faded by sun, but the purple line is still clear. In a grave marker etched with a bolt shape, the dead were buried with their best colors. In a priest's robe from 2 dynasties ago, on display in a temple closet, its edges still gleaming like new moonlight. This isn't just dye. It's defiance. Purple survives because it was made to. It ignores weather, ignores rot, ignores time. The cloth tears. The thread frays. But the color? The color stays. You visit a family whose ancestors were dyers. They don't make it anymore. The Murex is too rare now. But they keep one robe locked in a cedar chest. He wore this the day he met the king, the granddaughter says, reverently. It still smells. Here. And it does. Like the sea. Like salt. Like that strange, chemical tang of something once alive. You realize then that Tyrian purple isn't beautiful despite what it's made from. It's beautiful because of it. The death of thousands of snails, the weeks of rot, the risk of fire, the toll on hands and lungs and memory, that's what gives it weight. That's why it costs more than gold. Because it lasts. And in a world where so much fades, that's worth everything. You're far from the city now, walking along a coastal trail that dips between dunes and vineyards. The sea to your left is calm, almost drowsy, and the sun spills over the hills like warm wine. Ahead lies a village you hadn't noticed before, small, quiet, The kind of place that rarely makes it onto maps. But the sails in the bay tell you all you need to know. Phoenicians have been here, too. Not with temples or markets or fountains carved in the likeness of gods. Just a handful of homes, a single stone pier, and purple-dyed laundry strung between fig trees. It's a dye worker settlement. You enter as the day begins, and you find children chasing chickens and goats with the casual authority of those who've grown up with both. You meet a boy with sea salt in his hair and a broken sandal who proudly tells you he knows how to boil snails. His sister laughs and corrects him. He knows how to drop them. Mama does the boiling. Their mother, unsurprisingly, is elbow deep in a stone vat, stirring with a stick longer than she is tall. You've smelled this before, but never this strong. Out here, away from the perfumed alleys of Sidon or Carthage, the dye work is raw, untamed. No olive oil to sweeten the air. No incense to mask the stink. Just sun, salt, rot, and skill. And yet, they seem happy. These are the children of salt and wind. They've never seen a scroll, never worn a full robe of their family's own making. But they know how to spot a ripe murex. How to slice it just right. How to tell, by scent alone, if the fermentation is working. The boy leads you to a tide pool where snails cling to rock like ancient secrets. This one's good, he says, tapping it gently. Still heavy. Historians still debate how much of the dye process was passed down in formal guilds versus informal family networks. But here, it's oral, embodied. Grandma taught Mama. Mama teaches them. And they'll teach their children, whether they want to or not. You help haul a basket of harvested shells up the hill, and a grandfather, barefoot, toothless, but sharp as a hook, points to the sky. Weather's shifting, he says. Better ferment faster. The dye doesn't wait. Nor does the sea. At midday, you sit beneath an almond tree where an old woman is threading scraps together into a patchwork blanket. She hums to herself, then tells you the story of how her husband proposed using a piece of purple cloth as a ring. He said it would last longer. She grins. He wasn't wrong. You wonder, watching her sew, how many other Phoenician families across the coastline live like this. Dozens? Hundreds? Quietly keeping the art alive, not for commerce, not for kings, but because it's what they know. What they are. You ask the children what they want to be. One says a sailor. Another says a dyer. The youngest just says, I want to smell like Mama. And somehow, that's the sweetest thing you've heard in days. You realize then, the glory of Tyrian purple doesn't come from thrones and temples. It comes from this. The little fingers stained dark from helping stir. The jokes told beside steaming vats. The slippers ruined from carrying baskets too full. The families who may never see their cloth worn by queens, but still make it with love anyway. Because it's not just about money. Or power. It's about pride. Pride in the color. Pride in the process. Pride in knowing that even if no one knows your name, they're wearing your legacy. The kids drag you down to the shore at dusk, where tiny fires crackle in pits and shells are tossed into heaps. A teenage girl dyes her hair with a bit of leftover extract. Her friends scream. She laughs so hard she drops her comb in the surf. You ask her if it was worth it. She nods. Now I look like a goddess. You look at her hair. It's not quite purple. More reddish. But still, it shimmers. And she believes. That's enough. You leave the village as stars prick the sky, the wind wrapping around your shoulders like a loose shawl. The dye master's daughter calls out after you, if you ever want to learn for real, come back. And you almost say yes. Because out here, with the salt on your tongue and your hands still sticky from crushed snails, you feel something unexpected. Home. You've made your way inland now, leaving behind the Murex slick coast and heading into a Phoenician settlement nestled among olive groves and dusty hills. It's quiet here, not sleepy, but settled. Content. The sea is a memory, murmuring faintly on the horizon, and in its place rises the soft sound of pressing stones and dripping oil. Olive oil. You step into a courtyard where women are churning something in a large basin, green, thick, and bubbling with promise. Not purple this time, but gold. Liquid gold. The kind that makes bread sing and lamps glow and trade routes stretch just a little farther. Because as much as the world associates Phoenicians with purple, they were masters of much more. You sit beside a young man bottling the oil, and he tells you proudly, this goes to Memphis. The Pharaoh's cooks prefer ours. Then he pauses, shrugs. Or maybe it's the bottle shape. He hands you one, a long-necked, graceful amphora etched with Phoenician letters. Simple. Elegant. You run your fingers over the grooves. It feels like a whisper, we were here. You stroll past rows of clay ovens where soap is being cured. Yes, soap. Olive oil mixed with ash and herbs. You sniff a bar that smells faintly of rosemary and something like sunlight. It's humble. It's domestic. And yet, it might just be another quiet empire. Historians still argue how much of Phoenicia's wealth came from dye versus these side hustles. Olive oil, wine, dried fish, resin, glass, cedar, perfumes, even tiny carved amulets that somehow found their way to markets in India. You pause at a stall selling dyed wool satchels stuffed with pine nuts, dried apricots, and pressed fig cakes. A merchant nearby lights a lamp using Phoenician oil. Its flame steady even in the breeze. Ours burns longer, he says. Even our fire is better. You smirk. The confidence never gets old. At the edge of the settlement, a small forge belches smoke into the sky. Inside, two craftsmen are shaping bronze tools, the sparks painting their arms in firefly colors. One of them is a woman with soot on her cheeks and a band of purple cloth wrapped around her wrists. For luck, you watch as they pour molten metal into molds for fishhooks, then, just as easily, switch to perfume caps. Same fire, she says, different smell. You find a group of traders preparing for a caravan. Camels grunt in protest, and fabric bundles are cinched tight with wax rope. These aren't just exports, they're ideas. Little pieces of Phoenician practicality and elegance heading toward Mesopotamia, maybe even as far as the Indus. You step closer and recognize the logos on the bundles, not brands, but seals. Each one different. Family crests. Shipping guarantees. Honor codes, pressed in clay and tied to crates. Even if someone steals it, you'll know whose it was. A young boy is painting a ship's name on a crate of soap. You ask what it says. Whale's Promise, he says, beaming. She's fast. You nod. The name sounds made up, but also perfect. Later, you help load some of the goods onto a cart bound for a distant river port. The driver offers you a dried pomegranate as thanks. As you chew, tart and sweet, you look back at the town. It's small, but it hums with industry. Not ambition, exactly. Just ability. A place that builds things the world quietly needs. Phoenician wealth wasn't just anchored in sea snail rot and rare cloth. It was in the things that made life better. Smoother. More fragrant. More lit. Things that softened the world around them and lasted. You return to a small square where children are playing a game involving nuts, sticks, and a lot of shrieking. An old man watches them and mutters, noisy as Carthage in spring. You sit beside him. He tells you, between sips of wine, about his youth. About how he once rode with a caravan that brought cedarwood to Babylon. The temple priests argued over whose incense burned cleaner. He chuckles. So I lit both and walked away. You laugh with him. Because that's the thing. Phoenicians didn't just trade objects. They traded solutions. Need wine that won't spoil? Try their resin-lined amphory. Need a lamp that won't flicker? Their olive oil. Need cloth that sings in candlelight? You already know. You walk back toward the edge of the town as evening settles in, the shadows long and cool. You pass a shop where glass beads shimmer in every color but purple. You stop. Out of stock, the shopkeeper shrugs. Everyone wants purple. Of course they do. But tonight, with the taste of olive and the scent of ash still clinging to your skin, you remember something important. Phoenician greatness wasn't just in the glory goods. It was in the everyday things. The things that lit homes, cleaned bodies, fed travelers. The things you miss only when they're gone. Like fire. Like oil. Like a bar of soap shaped by someone's careful, purple-stained hands. You're on a ship again. This time, not a sleek trading galley bound for Sicily or an outpost ferrying olive oil and cloth. No, this ship is heavier. Slower. Laden with iron ingots and cedarwood. And a fair amount of nervous silence. Because this voyage? It's going to be rough. The captain doesn't sugarcoat it. Sharks in the south, pirates in the west, and the gods know what in the winds. Then he smiles like that's part of the charm. You climb aboard anyway. You set out just before dawn, sails catching a reluctant wind. The crew moves like a single limb, silent, efficient, sun-leathered and salt-tested. You recognize a few, a boy from the dye village now grown into his sea legs, a scribe with ink stains up his sleeves, and a cook who sings old prayers to Baal between stirring pots of sour lentils. You pass the time watching the sea change colors, blue, green, black, bruised purple under the clouds. The further you go, the more the coastline disappears, and with it, your sense of orientation. That's when the sharks show up. You spot the first one trailing the rudder, sleek and lazy. Then two more. The helmsman mutters something about the gods testing our price. The captain tosses a fish head overboard. The sharks disappear. Maybe they were never there. But the mood shifts. The sky thickens like soup, and by nightfall, the ship is groaning under the weight of a rising swell. You clutch a rope as rain lashes the deck like hot silver. The crew is shouting now, in a dozen dialects, but somehow still working together. You glimpse a talisman nailed to the mast, milk carts I carved into cedar. And then, lightning. Close. Bright. Followed instantly by the kind of thunder that feels like a punch to your chest. The ship lurches. You fall. Something crashes behind you, crates of glass beads, lost to the storm. A sailor grabs your tunic and hauls you up. "Don't look at the sea," he yells. She gets jealous. You don't ask questions after that. Just survive. The storm breaks by dawn, but the sea remains angry. The wind moans low, like it's remembering a fight it lost. The cook finds you huddled under a tarp and hands you a bruised date. "You live," she says, as if it's an accident. The crew begins to sing as they bail water and reset the sails. It's not a happy song. It's more like a contract, a promise not to sink. One of the verses calls out to Tanit, goddess of the moon and fertility, asking her to pluck the ship from the teeth of chaos. Historians still debate whether Phoenician ships used more than stars and instinct to navigate. Some claim they had early compasses. Others believe they used bird migration, sea foam, even the color of the water itself to sense depth. Whatever it was, it worked, because by afternoon, land returns. And so does the sun. You dock at a fishing village carved into a volcanic cliff. It's not on any of the official charts. But the locals wave as if they've been waiting for you. The ship unloads quietly, cedar, oil, a few spools of purple. The priest offers a small figure of Melkart to the headman. They touch foreheads. Then the wind turns again. Just like that, the ship sails on. But you stay behind. You need time to remember you're not made of pitch and rope. That night, the villagers offer you shelter under a hut roof patched with old sailcloth. They serve you fish smoked in seaweed and wine too strong for the cup that holds it. You sit beside a boy who tells you the names of the stars. Not their real names, his names. One is the laughing tooth, another is the goat that watches. He points to the moon. "That's Tanit's mirror," he whispers. You nod. You've seen her symbols burned into holes and painted on dye vats. Her crescent eyes watching from the robes of midwives and the prayer beads of captains. It's strange. The Phoenicians mastered the sea, but they never stopped fearing it. They prayed. They bargained. They built ships better than anyone, but always with the knowledge that the sea could swallow them without apology. So they adapted, invented, traded even with the storm. They made gods out of waves and wind and purple snails. And they survived. As you fall asleep to the crash and hush of distant surf, your limbs still aching from the storm, you understand something. You don't need to conquer the sea. You just need to outweed her long enough to make it home. And maybe leave a little purple behind, just so she remembers your name. You're in Rome now. Not ancient Rome at its height, not quite yet, but rising. Buzzing with marble ambition and a hunger for everything it doesn't already own. And among the scrolls and columns and soldiers rehearsing their futures, you see something that makes you smile. Phoenician sails. They bob in the harbor like they own the place. And maybe they do. Not in the way legions do. Not with spears. But with influence. With ideas. With purple. You walk through the Roman marketplace and see a familiar dance. Merchants boasting, buyers bluffing, and always someone whispering about the real source of that cloth, or that oil, or that strange blue glass that changes color in the light. The Romans are building fast, but not from scratch. They're copying, borrowing, adapting, just like everyone who meets the Phoenicians eventually does. Historians still debate the full extent of Phoenician influence on Roman engineering, script, and trade policy. But you only have to glance around this city to feel it. The Roman alphabet? A direct descendant of the one you watched scribes practice in Tyre. Their ship designs? Shockingly familiar. Their glass-blowing techniques? Lifted from Phoenician forges and only slightly rebranded. You pass a Roman official wearing a purple-bordered toga. He walks slowly. Not because he's old, but because he wants to be seen. That border alone costs more than most citizens will earn this year. And it's Phoenician. Still is. The dye, the technique, the bragging rights. All imported. You duck into a cloth shop run by a middle-aged Roman woman with fingers permanently stained blue. She catches you looking and smirks. Murex, she says, lifting a basket. From the Punic coast. I had a little matter to stretch it. Don't tell the senators. You won't. Rome has a reputation to protect, after all. But scratch the marble and you'll find cedar. Crack the coin and you'll smell salt. Peel back the border of a royal cloak, and there it is, Phoenicia, woven into the threads. You sit beside a fountain near the forum where two young scholars argue over the origins of the alphabet. One insists it came from Etruscans. The other says Greeks. Neither mentions Phoenicians. You raise a finger. 22 letters, you say quietly. Came on a boat. From the east. They blink at you. And go back to arguing. You smile. Later, you meet a glass merchant whose display glows with vials and flasks in every hue. He boasts of Roman innovation, Roman style, Roman craftsmanship. Then he gestures to his most prized piece, a tiny amphora the color of seawater, with swirling lines trapped inside the glass like smoke. Phoenician, he whispers. It's not for sale. You understand. Because even Rome, with all its pride, its baths and laws and sculptures, knows how to revere what it didn't invent but couldn't improve. You wander into a side street where a purple robe is hung to dry, illegal, technically, unless you're of a certain class. But the owner clearly doesn't care. Or maybe he's just hoping no one checks too closely. That's the thing with purple. Once you've seen it, really seen it, you can't go back to beige. It haunts. It glows. It lingers in memory like a taste you can't name but crave anyway. You think about all the Phoenician hands that touched that dye before it ever brushed this Roman cloth, the boy who harvested the snails, the woman who stirred the vat, the scribe who recorded the shipment, the sailor who watched for pirates, the priest who blessed the bolt, the merchant who dared to sell it here in the shadow of a rising empire. And now it hangs in the alley, casually defying law and dust alike. Later, you sit at a small roadside stall where an old man is selling charms carved from bone. He presses one into your palm without asking. It's a murex shell. Crude. Slightly chipped. But unmistakable. From my grandmother, he says. She came on a ship. Taught me how to tell real purple from lies. You turn the charm over. The grooves are worn smooth from generations of fingers. Rome thinks it's new, he chuckles. It's only new to them. You nod. Because Phoenician influence isn't flashy. It doesn't raise armies or carve its face into cliffs. It just survives. In alphabets. In glass. In snails. In color. In memory. And in every empire that thought it was starting something fresh, when really, it was just repackaging what the sailors from Tyre figured out 1,000 years ago. You wake to the smell of something rich and earthy, oak bark, sweat, and ash. You're in a backroom workshop on the edge of a market town, somewhere between Carthage and Rome. You can't tell if it's still morning or already slipping into dusk, but you know this much. Something's wrong. The air feels heavier here. Not from heat or humidity, but from cost. You watch as a boy no older than 15 drags a basket of snails across the floor. His tunic is threadbare, his face expressionless. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. You already know what kind of place this is. A dye house. Not the family-run kind in the village with laughter and lunch breaks and songs. This one runs on silence. You follow the scent through a corridor where vats bubble faintly. Here, the snails are crushed faster, boiled longer, stored in pits where the stench has seeped into the stone. It's efficient, brutal, mechanical. There's no reverence here, only production. Purple's price has climbed. And so has its appetite. Historians still argue whether the explosion in demand came from Rome's elite or Carthage's expanding merchant class. Either way, the result is the same, more dye. Faster. Cheaper. Whatever it takes. You pass a man coughing into a cloth. His hands are blistered, his teeth blackened by fumes. It gets in the blood, he rasps, then turns back to stirring. You move on. In another chamber, rolls of wool are soaked in brine. Not linen, too delicate. Wool holds the dye better, but the dye vats have been reused too many times. You notice discoloration, uneven tones, patches that look more rust than regal. The merchant in charge shrugs. Most buyers can't tell the difference. They see the word Phoenician and empty their purses. You ask if it's still real Tyrian dye. He smiles. That depends who's asking. A delivery cart clatters past, and you catch a glimpse of the crates inside, one marked with a king's seal, the other unmarked but locked. The workers avoid your gaze. You realize some of these crates won't pass through legal channels. They'll move at night, under torchlight, guarded not by priests, but by mercenaries. And then there's the other price. You visit a storeroom where enslaved workers sleep between shifts. Not just adults. Teenagers. Some even younger. One girl still has sea sand in her hair from wherever she was taken. You remember the dye master's quiet vault, the reverent hush of his chamber. This is the opposite. This is the stomach of the beast. You step outside for air, dizzy with the weight of it. The sun is setting, and in the red light, the walls of the workshop glow faintly violet, as if the building itself is weeping dye. Purple has become poison. It stains everything. You find a merchant down the road selling imitation cloth, dyed with madder root and beet extract. Better for the conscience, he jokes. Also doesn't smell like death. You smile. But it doesn't stick. Even fakes now imitate the damage. You wander into a small temple near the harbor, where an offering bowl holds a single strip of cloth. It's pure, deep, the kind of purple that knows what it is. You ask the priest where it came from. Ransom, he says simply. A merchant paid to release his son. Left this behind as thanks. It hits you then. Purple isn't just wealth. It's leverage. It bribes governors. Buys silence. Pays for freedom. Or doesn't. You sit at the harbor wall that night, watching two ships load side by side. One is bound for Alexandria. The other? You're not sure. But its guards are heavily armed. Its cargo is locked. And one crate leaks a faint, unmistakable drip of dark liquid. Tyrian dye. Still wet. Still bleeding. The captain oversees everything without a word. His cloak is lined in a thin purple stripe, just enough to assert power, not enough to invite envy. He catches your eye, holds your gaze, and then turns away. Because even he knows the truth. The world doesn't love purple for its beauty anymore. It loves it for what it can buy. And in the corners of this empire, where hands blister and eyes turn glassy from fumes, that color, once sacred, once whispered, now hums with something colder. Not reverence. Not romance. Just hunger. You're walking now through the quiet hills above a once thriving Phoenician port, now mostly ruins. Broken columns, toppled altars, pottery shards half buried in the grass. The sea is still out there, humming gently, but the docks are gone. No sails. No shouting. Just the slow reclaiming of stone by earth and vine. This place once pulsed with purple. And now? Just ghosts. You trace the outline of a dye vat, its basin cracked and filled with rainwater and weeds. A lizard darts across what might have been a workshop floor. You find fragments of shells, murex, unmistakably, scattered among the gravel like bone confetti. And yet no sign of walls. No fortifications. No battlements. The Phoenicians built for trade, not war. Historians still debate why. Why didn't they become an empire in the traditional sense? They had the ships, the wealth, the reach. Carthage came close, of course, especially once Hannibal got involved. But Tyre? Sidon? Byblos? They were never imperial in the way Rome or Persia was. Some say it was strategy. Why bother conquering land when you can conquer desire? Others argue it was temperament. The Phoenicians preferred coins over conquests, trade routes over territory. Their cities weren't capital and vassal. They were siblings, cousins, rivals, linked, but rarely unified. You sit on a boulder warmed by the sun and imagine a different world. One where Phoenician cities stood together under a single banner. A navy unmatched. A trade empire with purple on every flag and cedarwood in every beam. What would that have looked like? And then you realize something. They didn't need an empire. They were the bloodstream, not the muscle. They slipped between borders, beneath politics, around wars. Their influence spread quietly, invisibly. Not through legions, but through contracts. Through color. Through conversation. You pass a fallen tablet, its Phoenician script still legible in parts. A name. A date. Maybe an inventory. You imagine someone once stooping to write it, thinking they were just documenting a transaction, not knowing they were writing history. Further up the hill, you find what's left of a temple. A single column remains upright, the others lying like tired sentries. A small piece of purple cloth is tied around its base, newer than the ruins, older than the fingers that left it. A tribute, perhaps. A memory. You press your hand to the column's warm surface. There's a heartbeat here. Faint, but persistent. In another part of the world, a museum displays Phoenician artifacts under glass. Beads. Weights. Bits of cloth. The signs call them minor traders, regional players, but you've walked their markets, sat beside their vats, sailed their storms. You know better. You hear voices drifting up from the coastline, tourists, maybe, locals. The world keeps turning. The ruins stay still, but the ideas? Those move. You pass through a patch of wildflowers and spot a child running through the grass, holding a strip of violet fabric high like a flag. She's laughing. Her feet are bare. Her hair's a tangle of sunlight and sea air. She doesn't know she's holding history, but it's holding her. And that's the quiet miracle. The Phoenicians never needed to build an empire. They built something harder to destroy. They built a legacy. Invisible. Stubborn. Unkillable. Because even now, when their cities have crumbled, their gods forgotten, their alphabet obscured, their color remains. In museums. In monarchs' robes. In ceremonial flags. In the dye pits still used, centuries later, by people who don't know the word Phoenician but know the power of that color. And maybe that's the point. They weren't forgotten. They just blended in. Like salt in the sea. Like letters in a language. Like purple in the seams of time. You're back where it began now, standing on the rocky edge of a coastline dotted with broken shells and quiet wind. The sun is low, bruising the sky in hues that only the Phoenicians would have dared try to match. Violet. Crimson. A gold that wavers between sacred and smug. You kneel near the water and find, by chance or fate, a single murex shell. Empty. Beautiful. Utterly ordinary. You turn it in your hand, feeling the ridges, the weight. Once, 1,000 of these would have meant a robe for royalty. A year's wages. A bribe. A promise. A threat. Now it's just a shell. But your fingers remember. They remember the stink of the vats, the heat of the dye fires, the hiss of pitch under oars. They remember quiet scribes and loud merchants, elegant bolts of fabric in the long, salt-drenched silence between ports. They remember the children with purple hands, the merchants with purple tongues, and the kings with purple egos. They remember the dye, because the dye, more than anything, remembered them. You rise and begin walking inland, slowly, past the ruin of a dye house, stone tubs long dried, their walls still faintly stained. Moss has crept in. Lizards sun themselves where workers once wept from fumes. Time, it seems, is both a thief and a curator. You step into the skeleton of a workshop. The hearth is cold. The hooks are empty. But scratched into the wall, low, near the ground, barely visible under soot, is a single, carved letter. Phoenician. The shape is familiar. You saw it in the hands of a child once, learning to write. You saw it in scrolls, etched onto lead seals, burned into trade logs. It's nothing. It's everything. It's survival. Because writing lasts. Cloth fades. Walls crumble. But letters? Letters travel. They hide. They wait. And then, when the moment is right, they return. You sit in the grass as night rolls in, thinking of all that the Phoenicians gave the world, not through conquest, but through color, through code, through quiet brilliance. They didn't stamp their name across continents. They whispered it into fabric, into glass, into alphabets and amphory and ash. And they let the world do the shouting for them. The stars emerge, and you imagine the old sailors looking up, plotting courses by these same constellations. Ships slicing through the dark, heavy with dye and dreams and carefully scribbled contracts. You think about the gods they carried, Astarte, Melkart, Tanit. Maybe they're still out there. Maybe they're now woven into trade winds, speaking in the creak of rigging and the shiver of silk. Or maybe they never needed temples in the first place. Maybe the color was temple enough. You reach the ridge above the sea and turn for one last look. The coastline glows silver. The waves whisper against the shore. And somewhere out there, beyond history and fact and footnote, a bolt of true Tyrian purple still moves in candlelight. Not for kings, not for gods, but for the story. And that, above all, is what they left us. A story and a color that dared to last. So now, as you settle under your blanket or ease into the folds of sleep, let the color follow you, not the flash of modern dyes, but the deep, ancient shimmer of something born in salt and time. Picture it gently now. That bruised twilight violet, the color of crushed snails and crushed empires, of sails unfurling in silence and ink-stained hands writing letters no one would read for centuries. Let it wrap around you like a cloak, not heavy, but comforting. Not royal, but quiet. The kind of quiet that hums with memory. The Phoenicians didn't build an empire in stone, but in shadow and scent and syllable. Their temples washed away, but their alphabet is still on your screen. Their cloth has vanished, but the idea of it remains, whispered in old museums, echoed in royal ceremonies, hidden in the color you see when you close your eyes after dusk. Breathe in, breathe out, and remember that the most powerful things often come from the humblest places. A snail, a pot of boiling brine, a nameless trader on a nameless shore. They built a world not with walls, but with wonder. And you were there. Now drift. Let the waves carry you gently. Let the sails catch soft wind. Let the purple last a little longer. Sleep well. Sweet dreams.